Hey guys, today we're going over the best league starters for 3.26 Secrets of the Atlas. So I made this whole sheet today on stream, trying to look at all the best builds and also take knowledge from last league as well. Honestly, there wasn't actually that many changes from 3.25 to 3.26. Mostly just like the top builds were nerfed and the middle and underused builds weren't really buffed all that much. There was some spell buffs, but overall didn't change that much. So the list is more or so similar to last league. There are a few changes here. For example, slams are like way better. I originally had slams in S tier in last league as well, but they're even like better than what I thought they would be. So slams, I would say, are probably the best overall starter you can do 3.26. So yeah, this is the whole list. So first things first, this is a softcore trade tier list, mostly focused on like the day 1 to 7 progression. How well can it do tier 17s, how much currency does it take to scale, all that. This list does not apply to hardcore. A hardcore list would probably be pretty different, although there are some similarities, like slams being very good in hardcore and softcore. Also, disclaimer, we don't really know how good the mercs are going to be, how much they're going to buff us, how much is going to change the meta. For example, if mercs can use Doriani without dying, that means every landing build would get 3 times more damage, and that would make landing skills like the best thing in the entire game, and there'll be no reason to play anything else. So if that is the case, this list would look a lot different. Also, we don't currently know the passive tree changes for spells. We don't know if we're getting that before launch. And we don't know any of the new gems outside of like 2 of them. Also, the new gems could be meta, but we don't know them, so I can't really rank them here. So let's start off. So we have S tier, A tier, and specialized farm builds, stuff like Boss Farmer, Sanctum, Ultimate Expedition, stuff like that. I'll explain all as I go. We have S tier. I only have 2 builds here, and maybe a third one, Smite. I honestly don't think there's that many builds that deserve S tier this time. I actually do think the game is getting a little bit more balanced, closer together. Also, some builds do need to be brought up still, and some builds need to be brought down, stuff like slams. Yeah, these builds are extremely strong for week 1. They're really powerful with like no currency whatsoever. So like these builds are also extremely good in SSF, both Pconc Of Bouncing and Volcanic Fissure of Snaking. They're very, very strong early progressors while having really good scaling. In the case of Pconc Of Bouncing, if you want to scale this build even farther, you will swap it into Viper Shark of Mamba. It's a very strong build for anything that needs a lot of DPS, as it easily reaches stock cap. Otherwise, Pconc Of Bouncing is insane for clear, very good for a lot of mechanics in the game. Stuff like Sanctum, Expedition, tier 17 rush, very, very solid. Volcanic Fissure of Snaking, honestly, a lot of people are playing this build this league for a very good reason. It's exceptionally strong. It has insane clear, insane damage, really good defense because you're melee, so you have to get Fortify and Endurance charges, both are extremely strong defensive layers, currently in the patch. So yeah, very, very good, and also scales extremely well. Currently, before even straight stacking, you can get over 100 million DPS on this build on like a pretty decent budget. And of course, early on, you're at like a 10 million plus damage with like 1 or 2 divines. It's just extremely strong from like, day 1 all the way into like month, 30 days in. And at the very end, you can also go strength stacking and ditch the war cries and everything and just, play with kind of Fissure of Snaking with no war cries and pure strength stack. And that can reach like 200, 300 million DPS. So yeah, this build has insane early game, insane mid game, and insane late game. There really is no downside to this build. I know some people say, oh, I don't want to like, piano my war cries, I want to press both buttons, but the Volcanic Fissure builds nowadays, they only use like 1 war cry at most, 2 if you want to. Personally, in my build, I just use 1 war cry press and that's it. It's very, very smooth to play and it's overall very strong. I also will have a list of who you should maybe follow for these builds, just a little recommendation of people I know who are playing these builds. So for Volcanic Fissure, there's lots of guys out there. I'm also going to make one, I'll post for like 1 or 2 days. Pconc Of Bouncing, I believe Rutu is going to leak start this, and he's also going to have a guide for it as well. So Smite is kind of like in between A and S tier. I don't think it's quite S tier, but I also think it's above the A tier builds. So it's a pretty nice starter, and it's also extremely strong scaling. It has a lot of damage. If you weren't aware, Smite pretty much has the same damage as old Lightning Strike if we don't count return proj. You can double hit with Smite, and you can double hit with Lightning Strike. And yeah, so they pretty much have the exact same DPS numbers. Lightning Strike, which is way better, because Lightning Strike gets to abuse return proj with Nimis, which double the damage. Not anymore in this patch, but yeah. So yeah, with Lightning Strike nerf, Smite is essentially, the replacement, especially for early on. It's very, very strong. Lots of AoE. You can scale the AoE pretty heavily because AoE does scale aura effect. But yeah, just overall a very strong build. I would probably go Smite Slayer into Smite Champion and get more gear. But yeah, overall, it's really similar to 3.25 LS Slayer. You can follow a lot of Slayer builds from that, like any 2-hand Slayer build, sword build from 3.25. You can just input Smite and it's exactly the same. As for guides, I don't know if anyone's doing guides on Smite. I do know Palstron had a POB, but I don't think he's like doing like a full build guide on it. But it's pretty similar to LS. You can just find any old 2-hander LS pop, put in Smite, and you're good to go. A tier, so these are still really, really good. It's just not like OP like these S tier builds, but they're all extremely strong in their own right. Some are more niche to others. So Archmage, new Mana Man. So yeah, I think Ben is probably playing this. If not Ben, a Waggle had a video on it. I'm sure someone also played as well. I don't think anyone has a guide on it yet. But essentially what happened is that Vortex in the patch notes got double the damage. So you can play Vortex with Frostbolts now, and it's like 20% or so less damage than the old Archmage playstyle, which is, 20% less damage on Archmage is still extremely strong. Still a very, very strong build in the upcoming patch. I'm sure someone will have a guide for it before the patch launches. One thing to note, it definitely won't be nearly as strong for the late game because you don't have Ghost Wands, and Ghost Wands were just absolutely insane. Now, I'm sure there probably will still be like good rune enchants, but I don't think Ghost Wands are going to be beat in this patch. So it is something to note, the late game will be weaker. Bama, Previ, this guy does Bama like every league. It's a pretty strong bosser and also has like a pretty good map progression. You can do Force Tones pretty easily, very high damage. One thing to note, you do need like 2 Transfigure Gems, so if you don't want to like buy them, you'll have to farm lab quite a bit. But overall, still not a big deal. Now, I do want to say this is not really an order. I don't really think Bama is number 2 unless bosses are extremely perform, which could potentially have a high chance. Also, just 3 new pinnacle bosses, and you always have tier 17s. So if the new pinnacles are very profitable, the Bama would be a very, very nice starter to farm those tier 17 bosses. Next is KB Warden. KB Warden, there was like a Russian build floating around. I think it's like pretty decent. It's okay. It is pretty low defense, but the damage is really good for the budget. Modern PoE, another Russian, did replicate the build in game, and it did look pretty solid. Like I said, it is a Russian build. The video was in Russian, so I can't really say or translate it. Obviously, you can look at it for yourself. It does look decent, but I wouldn't play this unless you actually know what you're doing and you test the build yourself. But yeah. LA Hid and LA Deadeye. So I have a guide for this I released yesterday, of course. So the classic LA Deadeye, it does scale really well, especially when you go Tornado Shot, but you do need a few hundred divines to actually reach that point. Overall for League start, I would say it's really good for Legion. As I say here, you're pretty much forced into the Legion early on, but anything but Legion, this is a pretty mediocre or even bad build. If you are playing this build, you want to do Legion, it is your best mechanic. It can also do Breach. The Breach scales for buffs, so maybe that's something you can look at as well. Exang and Reap Mines from a person called Aeroplane. I looked into this, does look pretty good for the budget. It seems to be like a pretty solid mapper, especially with the +2 chain on gloves that mines and traps are getting this patch, which is extremely strong for Exang for mapping. The damage for Boston also looks pretty solid. Icicle Mine Deadeye, I think this is actually better than bows for early on. It's extremely strong with low budget, can get very high damage, has low defense because you're Deadeye, but overall it's a pretty strong build. I don't know who's making a build guide for this patch, but you can also check PoE Ninja for 3.25. It's a pretty strong starter. Ballista Hierophant, Palestron had a video on this. Looks like a pretty overall good starter. Doesn't scale that well for damage, which is like 40 or 50 million DPS, which is like okay, but it's nothing insane like these other builds. E-Blade, most likely Captain Lance, I would assume, have a guide for this. E-Blade is very strong in this patch. It's actually kind of buffed because you can make your Merc wear Procural's Toe, and this gives you lucky damage, and E-Blade has a roll range, so essentially this one item on your Merc is going to give you 33% more damage. So E-Blade is actually extremely strong this patch, was not touched, despite if you want Edge being nerfed. E-Blade is pretty similar to the EE, build and play style, and this was not touched. So yeah, pretty strong this patch. Also, there's other stuff we can't account for example, Mining Trappers are getting a +2 chain, but presumably every build's going to get something insane from the lead mechanic. We'll have to wait and see though. And then quickly go over the last section, specialized farm builds, so stuff like Sanctum, Ultimatum, Expedition, etc. Generally, I would not play these builds for standard mapping, but if you're going to farm one of these specific mechanics, then these builds are the go-to. For example, if you want to be a boss farmer, stuff like General's Cry or Minions, Bama, Maul, well, Ignite Maul is very, very strong, or like a ZHP Trapper or Miner is very, very strong for this content to rush tier 17s or farm Ubers for early on. You do have to be an experienced player for this. You have to know what you're doing, but these are very strong for early currency making, builds. So for Sanctum, Penance Brand, Assassin is usually by far the best build for Sanctum farmer. Now, something to keep in mind, Sanctum is being nerfed. Overall, it's probably still good, but who knows? So do keep that in mind, play this at your own risk. Second best is probably like Pconc or Shockwave, Icicle Mines, E-Blade. These are all probably pretty good Sanctum builds as well, but the best one is Penance Brand. Ultimatum and Miracles, he does Ultimate every single league. I think this time he's doing Cast 1 Stun, Chieftain DD, so pretty much the same as last league. Expedition, Pconc Of Bouncing, RF Chieftain, generally any Ignite Prolif or Poison builds extremely strong here. The Prolif builds are very, very strong for an Expedition, and Expedition is really, really strong early on, even without Scarabs. Minions, same tier as tier 4. Emerald Rotation, Jungron. Jungron builds, if you like playing multiple buttons, play Jungron build. If you don't like pressing multiple buttons, well then don't play a Jungron build. But his build does seem to be exceptionally strong for day 1 with insane damage, but you do have to press like 4 or 5 buttons, so keep that in mind. And now we have builds that scale exceptionally well, but I would not league start with these builds. So I would say Penance Brand only if you're doing Sanctum league start. If not, I would not league start it. Lightning Strike and Zenith. But Penance Brand, you can probably follow Z-Boob. He plays Penance Brand every league. I would still not recommend to league start it. I do think there's a lot better options unless you're doing Sanctum. Lightning Strike, it's like you can probably still league start it, but I feel like it's just overall worse on a lot of other melee skills now, like especially Smite. But once you have a lot of gear, like once you get Nimmies, it still has extremely high effectiveness added damage, and it's still extremely strong for clear. Zenith, same story. It's a really bad league starter, but once you get the gear, it'll still do a ton of damage. Then some honorable mentions real quick. Palgroth haven't messed around with Sabo Roll Magma because Sabo this patch got random directions, the Nimia effect, and its Ascendancy tree down. Does look pretty good, but it's untested, so who knows. Classic Cyclone, it was buffed this league, so like Cyclone Shockwave. It's like an okay starter, but I wouldn't like highly recommend it. Frostblades, it's the same as last league, so it is a good starter, but it has very, very low boss damage, but the clear speed should still be quite nice. RF, just follow Pconc. If you don't know what RF is, if you're a new player, he has an extremely well-written guide. I would recommend just to follow him if you want a like very easy and very low button play style. Bleed Lacerate was pretty good last patch, probably still pretty good this patch. Overall, not like an insane build, but like it's a decent starter. Pconc, this build's really only meant for campaign or for like 2 stones, and at most I wouldn't really play it past 4 stones. But yeah, it is a very, very nice, the fastest campaign character in the game, and it's also probably like the fastest 2-stone in the game, but it doesn't really scale past that. Anyway, that's about it for my tier list. I hope I went over everything here. Once again, anything here is good enough to league start, and is what I would recommend. You can pick anything here. Of course, it's probably like a few builds I missed or something, but yeah. Overall, this patch does seem to be a little bit more balanced than the last patch, but there are a few exceptions here, like Slams, which is absolutely insane. Pconc is still extremely strong, and Smite is probably like the new LS, but it won't scale as well. But yeah, anyway, that's about it.